So, you have heard about soft pastels and you seem excited about the medium, but you're not really sure where to start or how to apply them. On the other hand, maybe you have been playing with this great medium for a while and you have some gaps in your understanding and you might want that knowledge. This video should help you. I did this primarily for a Pastel Society, but there's a lot of good information in here that I want to share for those who are looking for more. When you're done, if you have any specific questions, please contact me or join my Patreon. Meanwhile, let's check it out.
These are some of my favorite pastels or just some paintings that I've collected to show you the variety of styles that we can each create with our own pastels. And by watching others and studying them, you can see what other people do with their pastels. They're different marks. If it's very straight and direct, or if it's more layered. I love this, the paper showing through. Just all that gray is just basically the paper. How wonderful is that? That becomes an element in the artwork. We all know this wonderful artist, I think, member of the Pastel Society in Maine, Linda Celta. This is Brian Bailey. He does these beautiful gauze over the images. He often works with nudes. And I believe he said he did that initially because one of the nudes he was painting was a little shy. So he draped this veil over her and it's become a signature of his. Now, once you might have a signature, it doesn't mean you have to stick to that style forever. Think Picasso. Picasso was always changing his style, always experimenting with new ways. Subject matter. Mixing up the subject matter. A lot of the pastelists do landscapes. Look at the energy of this cross-hatching strokes here. This is exciting. This is one of our members as well. This is Bernadette. I love her mysticism in her paintings. It's fascinating to me. You can go super realistic. Even the this board that's around here, that's actually part of the painting. That's not a board. That's part of the painting. Working with figures, somewhat realistic or a little more impressionistic. Very simple, almost abstract, but still you can see it's probably a forest in snow. This is a Casey Klon. This, he uses this special gauze over his paper and adheres it and then paints these wonderful mosaic type pastels. By looking at other people's art, it can give you ideas. It can spark something new within you. I love doing portraiture. This is not mine. This is, look at the gold on that. To paint something shiny, you want contrast. This reminds me of a Turner. This is Lorianne's. It's just a glow. Texture, color, composition. These are things I'm going to talk about on other nights. Expression. Very simple, but very effective. It seems simple, but this person obviously is masterful in their ability to handle the medium. Ultra realistic. Beautiful. Tara Will, to me, her paintings, oh, because she also does like linoleum and woodblock prints, it looks like that. I love the way her marks follow the energy and the shape. So pastels. We've seen many other people's collections. Everyone looks different. This is not mine. I believe this is, I'm trying to remember, I think this is Laura Pollock's actually, because she was sharing with me how if you're going to travel with your pastels, you take a photo of what's in the box and put it on the outside of the box for customs. Some people are much less organized with their pastels. You can see this is kind of going somewhat from darks to purer hues to her lights, but who knows? If you've ever seen, I've seen a couple of people's, Tara Will is one, she just picks it up, draws hers, and by the time you look at her box, it looks like everything's medium gray. And I don't know how, she knows her sticks, she knows the shape of them, she knows what they do, and then every now and then she cleans it out. This is a couple of my boxes. This is my main box. I work from darks through the medium values to the lights. I do have PanPastels. I also save dust here. This comes off my easel, or if a stick breaks, I get crumbles. So you can see my crumbles, I save those. I do reconstitute mine and make them into new pastel sticks. Or sometimes, like in the painting that was at the international show this year, the one with the wires, I just sprinkled some of that onto my painting. So that's a great thing about pastels. You can work with them so many different ways. You're not limited. And then of course I have my new pastels here. Now, since IAPS, there was a report that has come out about checking your pastels for color fast quality. And the report would not name brands for us. So it behooves us to check that out for ourselves. And we can encourage, as individuals and societies, we can encourage the manufacturers to make their pastels out of pure pigment. I am right now in the process of doing a test on new pastels. That's another whole story, but I'm doing a video on that on my YouTube as well, so that you can see if they fade or not over time. One point that was made at IAPS, and this was at the President's Forum, was that Degas, some of his ballerina paintings were actually originally on lime green paper. But because the pigment that they used to dye the paper was not color fast, it has faded over time. And they're still beautiful paintings, but we see them as being on more of a neutral, warm paper. And they weren't originally like that. So thinking how you could imagine seeing some of these paintings with that lime green just sparkling through would be amazing.
Carrie Lynn, you've got a question in the comments from Nancy Culver wants to know, what do you mix with your saved dust to make your own stick?
I am coming back to that, but I actually mix it if it's already, I'll come back to it again. I'm sorry, I'm going to repeat probably. If it is dust from a pre-made pastel, it already has the binder in it. So I will grind it down with a mortar and pestle, and then I have a muller on glass. And again, another video I'm making. So then I'll add water and alcohol to that. But if I am using pure pigment that I have purchased in a store, then you have to add a binder. And I've been using gum tragacanth. And I'll show you that in a little bit. Good question. But you can take these.
If it's just dust, you don't need to do that.
Right. If this dust is just from these pastels, then I don't need to add more binder. There's already binder in it. I use the water to make it into a paste. I'll use the alcohol to help it to dry faster. And each pigment has different properties, so I cannot, it's my most watched YouTube video, and people say, what's the ratios? And I'm like, you can't know exactly, because each pigment has different properties. Some will take more liquid, some will take less. You can see in here some of these, this square one here, the one beside it, these are my homemade pastels, and I use them all the time. These two blue ones, I didn't grind fine enough, so it has some particles in it, which will leave little lines. It's kind of fun for rocks, but you don't want that on some things. This is a homemade, this one. So I have a number of homemade, and I find myself using them. My homemade pastels tend to have the texture usually of about a Diane Townsend, which I read.
Kathy also wants to know what the brand of the box is.
This is I can never say it. Is a Heilemann?
Yep. Heilman.
Heilemann box. One of the people who encouraged me to join Pastel Society in Maine sold me this as a used box. And she said, I'm sorry, it's dirty. And I'm like, no, that means it has history. And that means so much more to me. I love it. And I tend to use it at home. I am not a person who has tables and tables and tables of pastels, because as I look at those, I think, when in your lifetime are you possibly going to use all those pastels? So I tend to pick up more pastels as I find I need them or as I use something up. This is another great pastel box. I do believe this is one of Lina Celta's. Don't tell I share. Colors. Again, for years, all I worked with was Rembrandt. And I remember being so frustrated as I was doing, say, a painting of a geranium and trying to get that final pow of red, that the Rembrandt reds were just too hard. And then somebody showed me a Terry Ludwig, and I'm like, there it is. That's the answer. Or a Sennelier or a Rocher. So many options. This is a great, this came from Dakota, which you can find this on the dakotapastel.com site. And remind me if I don't have that on one of my papers, I'll send that out. I'm not going to redo something all the time if it's already out there and done very well. This is soft pastels from the softest down through by their ratings, going down and describing them somewhat. Thought I had a second page on this, but I don't see it right now. Oh, here's the second page of that. And then your medium pastels and your hard pastels. That's a chart. I have this chart on my computer in PDF form, so I can send that if you'd like. When you go into a store, compare your pastels. A lot of the times they'll have little pieces of paper you can test them on. Sennelier, of course, you want to be very cautious with and careful when you pick it up. You don't want to break it. Blue Earth. Here's some Diane Townsend. These are her Tarrage pastels. I've started making some of mine in those nice chunky shapes because sometimes you just want to put a whoosh pastel on your painting. Great American. J. Luda. This is kind of an up and coming pastel company. They are in Europe, but they do ship to the United States. And right now, I think, I shouldn't say, but I think if you buy over $85 worth, they'll ship free, but that would be worth checking. Can't promise that right now. Terry Ludwig, of course. I don't have some pictures of Giraud in here. Now, I say the pastel names, the French ones especially, in French. So if you're not sure which ones I'm talking about, please ask. Giraud is what a lot of people call Giraud. PanPastels. Do you remember Nancy Lovely? She was one of the members of Pastel Society Maine years, and she did a demonstration with PanPastels. I had never seen them before. I use them often for underpaintings. They're a great pastel for that. You've got your new pastels, now only come in boxes, box sets. You cannot buy them individually anymore. Here's some Richardson. If you haven't gone to IAPS, Richardson this year and probably in 2024, they come and you can pick up 10 of this size sticks and 2 of his chunk ones free. They were giving them away. And that's what they did this last year anyway. And then you fill up the rest of your box with other colors. Here is some pure pigment. And I've started buying some of this. I purchased some from a Pastel Society Maine member. She said, I'm never going to get to making pastels out of this. Who wants to buy this pigment? So I put my hand up, got a bunch of pigment for $100, and then I'm adding into it. The thing I find the most I need is some titanium white to make some nice tints. But when you get a pure pigment, you know it's pure. It's not going to fade. It's what we're looking for. Ultramarine red. I use Vine and willow charcoal, mostly for underpainting, not underpainting, for sketching in. That's my most go-to, unless I'm doing a very light painting, and then I'll use a light new pastel or something. This is gum arabic. You can use this in place of gum tragacanth if you need to reconstitute your pastels. But again, and here's the gum tragacanth, not a great picture. This one I bought on Amazon. I get it in the gel form because it also comes in a powder form. And if I'm using pure pigment, I need to add some of this in as a very light binder. But this gum tragacanth you can eat. It's safe. Some people use it as a health thing. So these are, I mean, you don't want to eat your pastels because some of your pigments are not safe to eat. But this binder is.
Box. Have you ever brushed the pure pigment on your surface as an underpainting?
I will take sometimes the pure and I don't brush it on, but I'll rub it in. In again, that painting at the international show, I did some of that. I rubbed some of that in. I used some alcohol and I brushed it in that way. So I'm mixing and matching and doing a variety of techniques as I go along. I love experimenting with things. Of course, that means often many paintings don't come out that well, but as you get experienced, you can get some really exciting results in doing that. Again, this is kind of set up for beginners, so I'm going through a number of things. So your substrates. Substrate just means the surface that you're painting on. There's a number of different ones. As I mentioned before, Mi-Tint, this is kind of the go-to. There is now a Mi-Tint,
Touch.
I haven't used it. Touch, thank you. Yes, Mi-Tint Touch. I haven't used that. There's Pastel Matte, Pastel Fix. This is Han Mueller. Tends to have a softer surface, wonderful for portraiture. My newest favorite is Luxe Archival. I find this is very much as one of the favorite papers, the UArt. Everybody likes UArt. Luxe Archival to me is like UArt 600 or 700. I mean, UArt doesn't make a 700, but it's more like that. But it also does not curl at the edges. And it takes liquids wonderfully. It only comes in one color right now, but you can underpaint and tint your paper anything you want. Of course, there's the old standby Wallace. I just got a piece of this. It's not made anymore. I finally got to try it, and it was very good. But I found I like the Luxe Archival even better for my approach. And it's good to try a number of different papers. One way of doing that, let me finish this. Sennelier Lacarte does not take liquids. Wonderful surface though. Your UArt comes in different tooth. You have the 400, 600, there's many different tooths. Some are rough, some are smoother. If you're thinking like sandpaper, the higher the number, that means like how many grains per, I think it's inch or something, might not be square inch or square centimeter. So the higher the number, the finer the sand. The lower the number, the rougher the sand.
Rose wants to know which is your favorite tooth among those.
On the UArt, I usually carry 400 and 600 with me. And then I can pull out which one I want. If I'm doing a very rough landscape, I'll probably go with a 400. But for things that require a little more detail, I'll go with a 6. I have tried the 8, but getting a little too fine for me. This shows some of the different textures, how UArt and different paper, this is all UArt, takes the pastel. Now you can also use other substrates like this, the Colorplast White, or this is a Richardson hardboard panel. So you want to seal this in the way, which you can seal with gesso or a number of different things. I like using something clear to seal it because then I can use this wonderful texture. And I'll show you one of my paintings later that I use that. So it's a pre-made neutral background. It's wonderful. Japura paper, very fascinating. This is a handmade rag paper from Japan. I tried this, and I'm going to show you my experiment with this paper. Artisan Craftsman in Portland has this, or they did have this. Comes in a variety of colors, and this is what I use over it. So if I am dealing with one of these papers, or even with Mi-Tint paper now, I will tape it down and I will use a fine pumice gel. And you can either smooth it on with a palette knife, a sponge brush, or a bristle brush. And that fine pumice gel is going to give you that sanded texture on whatever surface you're working on. Opens up all sorts of opportunities. Any questions on that? I know for a lot of I'm sorry.
Quick question. If you use that gel on top of the paper and then you want to do an underpainting, does it dry hard enough and not come back up if you do a alcohol wash on top of that?
The pumice gel?
Yeah.
Yes, it's acrylic based, so it is
Okay.
not coming up. Yeah.
Okay.
Good,
Never tried
good
that.
question. And I'll show you on too. I put some interesting ones together for later on. There's a coarse pumice gel as well. I've played with that. I don't play with it very often. It's very rough. It's very rough. The only way I could get that to work was destroy a PanPastel brush, sponge, PanPastel sponge, rubbing it into the texture and then taking alcohol and washing it down into that texture. But it had some interesting results. All right, let me double check substrate. Oh, with your lighter papers, if you notice, for instance, I'm thinking a lot of you have worked with UArt, and it comes in the ivory or the buff, and it comes in a dark. It's not black, it's more like a dark charcoal gray. By using a light surface, that is going to allow microscopically your light to penetrate through your pastel and bounce off that surface and illuminate your pigment.
Yeah.
If you look closely at the dark, you will see, if you hold it in the light, it has a sparkle to it. And I believe they've added something into it, like a mica or something, to help keep that luminosity in the paper. Because the first time I saw them, I'm like, why are they doing this? And then I was watching something on Da Vinci today, and how he put layers underneath to allow the light to go all the way through the layers of pigment and bounce back up for luminosity's sake. And I thought, oh, that's why they're doing that. Or I'm assuming anyway. I make a lot of assumptions. Seems logical to me. Pigment. This is
Arrow.
This is Pastel 50. You know how you have Pastel 101? This is Pastel 50. Backing way up, going. This in 1978, I was in Peru, and I took this picture of these beautiful indigenous people, and it fascinated me that this man had powdered pigment. Even way back then, I was fascinated by pigment. And he was just selling it. This is how they sell things, on the side of the sidewalk. And even when they dye their clothes, this is what they use. If you make oil paint, watercolor, pastel, some dyes, basically you're using the same pigments for these. It started out, for instance, one of the first pigments that you might be familiar, well, of course you're familiar, ultramarine blue, that rich, beautiful blue. Originally, they made that by grinding up lapis lazuli. That deep blue stone. So that's why some of the pigments were so expensive, because they're using semi-precious stones. One of the museums in Washington, D.C. has a display of all the different types of minerals and rocks. And I have pictures of those too. And I'm looking through them going like, that's where they got the idea. So when I started making my own pastels, and I went out to IAPS, I drove out, my goodness, that's 3,500 miles out and back. Going across Texas and stuff, I noticed that because it was almost nothing else, but I noticed slight changes in the dirt and the soil, the color. It would go slightly pink and then beige and then kind of a sage green. And so I bought, at the dollar store, little tubs about this big, and I'd pull over to the side of the road and I'd find areas that had been silted, that had been washed off in the most fine pigment. So I'm making pastels out of dirt because that's what originally was done. That's what the cavemen did. That's where they originated. That's how it happened. Now, if you're thinking about pastels, this is actually micaceous iron oxide with an electron microscope. Micaceous. I get talking a lot. My pronunciation stuff. And it's warm in here. You can see I'm pretty warm. So this is what pigments look like microscopically.
Mhm.
They're little flakes and they sit up. And if we take, it's fine on the underpainting and there's no right or wrong way of doing this, but if we blend all the time, we're going to push these pigments down and we're going to flatten them. And that's going to lose that luminosity because, as you can see, they're sitting here at angles and each one is catching light at a slightly different angle. That too is one of the exciting aspects of pastel. As you finish up your final layers, if you keep it fresh strokes and fresh mark, you're going to maintain that beautiful luminosity. Another nice thing is that if you put one color over another color, that juxtaposition of these particles, imagine these in color overlaying each other. You're not just mixing them into one mush, one color. They're still separate colors sparkling against each other in juxtaposition, which is going to make them come alive to our subconscious. We might not notice it consciously, but it is actually happening. That's so exciting. Underpainting, liquids. What do we can use for liquids with pastels? Almost anything underpainting. If you do enter an exhibit, oftentimes they'll say the surface of the painting has to be 80% pastel. So that gives you 20% flexibility. But often we will do underpaintings and tinting of our pastel surfaces, our substrates, with other colors. Watercolor is a great way to do this. Here's a color fix primer. Another thing. There's a whole series of colors for this. Now this is coming through on the recording, so you don't have to write it all down now. Indian ink. If you want a black, India ink's a great way to go. We also have, this didn't come through, this is a liquid watercolor and liquid acrylic ink. Sometimes will give you vibrant underpaintings. This is a liquid Spectrafix. Often it's used as a fixative to finish. I'm a little concerned myself about this because it is a little heavy and they now have it in an atomizer bottle, which you can buy. I bought these atomizer sprayers separately and I'll show you when I come back, but they now sell this in this, so it's atomized. It's not, I would get dribbles, but I still have my old bottle, so I'll use it as textures. Or you can open it, dip a brush in and use it as an underpainting, underpainting medium to work your pastel into your paper. This is casein based milk product, totally non-toxic. These are some of my basic tools I use. When I put alcohol in a bottle, I will label that it's alcohol, because I also do watercolor. So, you know, my watercolor bottles don't have labels on them with the tape, but I do label my alcohol. Because you don't want to, like, oh, it's really hot, like right now, and I go to spray my face and have it be alcohol instead of water. I'm showing 70% isopropyl alcohol here because this was during COVID, and I did have some 91%, but I saved it for sterilization. Some people swear on the 70% even now, because if you're using alcohol with an underpainting, it will help that to dry faster, but maybe you don't want it to dry too fast. I also use this rougher sprayer for texture. Certain papers, if you get a thin coat of pastel, like with your PanPastels or something else, then you can spray it with your spray bottle and it'll add drops and texture that's great for, here's some of my secrets. They're not secret, nothing's secret. It looks like rocks or stones or something, you know, if you're doing a sanded beach. My basic tools, microfiber or cotton, these are face cloths, you know. I always have a bag. I have two bags actually. I have one with clean ones and one with dirty ones. And when I've used them for a bit, I'll throw the whole bag in with my blue jeans and stuff like that. Best not to, I did a research because I wanted to switch to cotton because of microfiber is not really environmentally friendly, but all the research I did said that microfiber is better, just keep using it because it's better than throwing it back into the environment. So this, a kneaded eraser is one of my favorite erasers for pastels. It not only, you don't really use it to erase so much as to lift color, and you can roll it up textured wise and add texture into your painting. Need a good sharpener, my vine charcoal. These are my two masking tapes. I use buff colored tape and black tape. If you use painter's tape, like the blue or the green painter's tape, because you've taped down your paper and it's right against your painting, that color is going to affect your complete painting. So you want to go neutral. Like I've seen people with the blue painter's tape and they're doing painting and you can't help it, but subconsciously it's going to affect your painting. Best to go neutral. Charcoal pencil, a small bristle brush for lifting paper. This is a cartridge eraser.
Hey, Carrie Lynn,
Yes.
Rose wants to know where you get the black tape.
Amazon. Yeah, it's a masking tape, and there is black art tape, which is acid free, but when I'm painting, I don't need the acid free. I just get a black masking tape. Anybody wants it, you know, go ahead. The information I send out after this, if it's missing something, please just email me and let me know you'd like information on something. Paper stumps, the torchons, this is great for blending, lifting. Stick, this one right here is my very first stick. I call it my Jen stick because when we had Jen Evenhouse, was that 2017 here in Maine as our instructor, at one point she sent us out and go get a good solid little stick and you use it for scratching and making great textures on your painting. Now, some people don't want textures. Some people like purity, but if you want a texture, a stick is a great way to go. Here's another tool I don't have a picture of. I don't know if you can see me. This is an acrylic tool. See how it's got teeth on it? So I can use that as well. Okay. Kneaded eraser, talked about this. This is drywall rasps. And if you find your new pastel or other sticks, if you're losing that sharp edge on that, you can use this to sand it down and regain that beautiful edge. And you notice it's over my little dish that I use to collect dust because I want to use that dust again. I have 2 air filters in my studio. Always good to have an air filter. And one of my favorite standby, this is my barrier for my hands. This is what I use, Clear Shield. It's available only at shop.com because it's a networking product, but I've tried others. It's just aloe and silicone and other things, and you put it on and it dries and you don't even notice that it's there. I personally can't use gloves unless I'm making pastels, but if I'm painting, I don't use gloves. So I've tried a number of things. This is my favorite. A little expensive, but it lasts for months and I use it a lot. Another friend recommended this Art Guard as a barrier cream. She likes this. Her jar has lasted for years. There's always your gloves, but you do want to protect your hands. And gloves in a bottle is another. Many people use this. I've tried it. For me, I don't like the way it feels on my skin.
Terry Lynn, Kay wants to know about which tape holds but doesn't tear the paper when you remove it.
I just use masking tape. Now, the trick is how to remove masking tape from paper. It's another thing I have a video on my YouTube channel, but I use it mostly for my watercolor. But as you pull it off, and I'll show it when I go to my easel, please remind me, okay? You want to pull it off at a 45-degree angle away from the painting. Usually your paper will not rip then. And if it does rip, it's going to rip away. It's not going to rip into the painting. That makes sense? Okay.
Thank you.
Does my explanation make sense? A number of things to hold your pastels in if you're traveling with them or going out plein air. There's art bin. Of course, there's your Heilemann pastel box. Of course, that's great. I like wooden box. Oh, here's my Heilemann box. That's not mine. That's someone else's. I'll go to antique stores or flea markets, you know, those type, and find I love old boxes and just store extra pastels. Fixative. I don't use fixative much. If you're using the sanded paper, you really don't need to. It holds it very well. Before framing, you do want to give it a good baby burp outdoors to remove any loose pastel. But done properly, usually it does not need fixative. There are times I do, and here is my number one fixative, Lasco. Again, it's a little expensive, but it lasts for me a long time, couple of years or so. It does not change the color of the pastel. It does not lay it down. It's my number one. Latour is also pretty good. Krylon has a new one that I've heard. I don't think it's this one, it's another one. It's just once you find a product, you tend to stick with it. And again, fixative, the Spectrafix, as I mentioned before, but to me, it's a little heavy and I see it push down and change the color of the pastels. There's a natural glass Spectrafix. I've played with this, but I haven't had good luck. It was supposed to be able to cover your painting so it didn't need glass. I found it rather shiny and I just haven't experimented with it enough to get it to work. Maybe somebody else has. Before framing or fixing or something, to move my pastels, I personally use Glassine. And you can get it in rolls. I cut it up to the size I want. Artisan Craftsman has it, I believe. Amazon has it. Almost any pastel, you know, Dick Blick, Jerry's Autorama, any of those. And when I tape it, I can use painter's tape here because it's just on here to protect my painting. And then when I take it off. So there's my masking tape. And I've learned to tell myself what kind of paper I'm using because sure enough, somebody will ask. But the Glassine protects it and I'll have just stacks of pastels with Glassine on it. Other people use different things. These are a good solid drawing board. I have a couple of these. I use those nice big office clips because they're quick and easy to use to put board onto my board. So I have the drawing board, but then I'll also go down to this one. I tape my paper onto, this is just foam core, dollar store foam core. And I can use it 2 or 3 times before I have to switch it up. And I just tape my paper to that. I go in about 1/4 of an inch onto the paper. When I tape it down, I fold this corner back so it's easy to pick up, and I pull it off away from the painting at the 45-degree angle. And then I'll take that and I'll just clip it to the board here. Under my board, I create a V trough, and this is to catch my pastel dust as it falls down from the painting. There are special mechanisms that will kind of vacuum it up or collect it. Some people will take newspaper or paper towels and dampen it to collect that, but I want to reuse my dust, so I save it. And I usually make these out of aluminum foil. A few layers of aluminum foil and they work well. See, see. So here I have some glassine over the board. You can see my foam core, just foam core. I have taped my UArt paper onto the foam core. Take that off. I did buy some blue tape a while back and I'm using it up, but I'm only using it in that way. I had this all tested before. I could zoom in. I was so excited. Now I can't. So with this taped down, and one thing you don't want to do is leave it on too long. It's the same with watercolor paper. And you can use watercolor paper as a substrate for pastel. You can use it plain, or you can add the pumice gel on top. Sometimes if you leave masking tape on the edge too long, the glue it changes somehow, and sometimes it will rip off. So as I'm pulling this off, I pull it at this about 45-degree angle away from the paper this way. And I do not have it ripped it doesn't rip when I do that. So I hope that works for the person that was asking. By clipping this on quickly on the board, I can also quickly change to another board like that. That's one thing that I like about this. I have a nice solid surface. The only thing is eventually this foam core does get dented and you have to switch it up and get a new one. Talk about how do we use pastel? What are some of the ways? Oh, look, you get to see my notes and everything. I'm going to work with some PanPastel first. This is PanPastel, if you haven't seen. It comes in these little tubs with covers on them. Sometimes they're stacked. But I highly recommend, if you're going to do that, to get one of these palettes, these plastic palettes, because then it acts like you can put a number of them. And I have put my earth tones in one palette. I have my brighter colors in another. And then I have some light colors in another. This is my favorite PanPastel tool. I like it because when I was in college, they told us to use the largest tool possible, the largest brush possible when you're starting a painting. There is an oblong one, but I don't like that because it leaves very distinctive marks. This does too, but you can also press it fully down, or you can turn it on its side and just get an edge of it. You can press it in a way that you're just going to pick up a corner. And if you turn it in different angles, you can get different marks with that. It also, you can very nicely make a background for your painting if you want. Smooth it all out. You can take some alcohol spray. This is that atomizer bottle, and I got this on Amazon. So that'll blend it in, and it adds different texture to it. Of course, if you use alcohol in an underpainting, you're going to want to let it dry before you come back over, usually. Sometimes you can go right ahead and move right into it if you want. I think that can work, because I wanted to show close up different ways you can use. You can, of course, a lot of people will use the tip of your pastel, and you can make different marks that way by using the sharp edges here. You can twist it just irregularly and have some beautiful natural marks. Light pressure, heavier pressure. So I'm just pressing a little heavier into the paper. Now I'm lightening it up, barely touching it, going across. So you have a lot of control on your sticks. You can take the side of your stick. Again, this is for very basic marks, and lay down good masses of color. This is how I usually start a painting. I will throw in large masses of color. You get your basic drawing down, masses of color, start designing. You can blend a little bit at this point. If I'm going to blend, I tend to do it early on in the painting for the underlayers. And then as I come toward the top, I will not blend anymore, because I want those particles, as we saw in the microscopic view, you want them standing up. You don't want to press them down into the paper. You can also take an edge of one of these, and I often look for the sharpest edge, and just, this is good for fences or something. And instead of trying to make a nice straight line, this, which is very hard to do, just use, I hold two ends of the stick this way, and just drag it across a little bit. And you can do it lighter or darker. And that way, it's a good, quick way of making marks. We've got the squiggles. We kind of have the old man line. That's what I call my old man line. You know, you're just like, oh, I'm old. Here it goes. That's hard to see because I use two values at same value almost. Marks, vary your marks, think about them. When I am laying in a pastel drawing, I will often use, as I said before, my vine charcoal, which usually you see it about like this. And I don't, if you look at any of my videos, I don't usually draw it in with the tip of it. I will often take this side of it, and this one's a little bent. And I will, let's see, if I'm doing a tree or something, I will mass in the area. Get a rough idea of where I want it to go. So it's not tight, or you can do it with the side of a large one. Get in your giant areas quickly. Everybody has a different way of doing things, but for your overall design, you want your composition to be solid and strong right from the beginning. Before I start working on paper, I almost always do sketches. I do little thumbnail sketches. I plan out my design, my composition, my values of the painting before I move to a larger piece of paper. That way you become familiar with the subject, and it's going to be a stronger painting because you have worked out, you're more familiar with it. This is one of my homemade pastels. Can you see the little particles in it? It wasn't one of my best. And it has more grit to it. You can see that grit. You can see it falling down here. And my little trowel is catching the dust as it falls down. You can do rolling marks. You could, if you wanted a texture coming across, just roll it across the painting. Now, if you're not sure what kind of texture it's going to create, you want a little scrap paper off to the side that you practice that on before you come over to your painting. You could twist the end of it. You can take this end and just kind of almost like you're doing a stencil or something. Find out what that's going to do. You're not limited to just drawing with a pastel. People will say, why are you calling it painting? To me, I call it painting because you're laying in masses of color. Yes, it's a dry medium, but we have other dry mediums as well. So if we have one color underneath and we put another color over, I'm just going to bring that across. It adds interest, it adds color and excitement into your painting. And that's out of focus. I will make another video on this because I'm a little frustrated with that I can't use my good lens on my camera. Stippling. Stippling is dots. Let's get a color you can see. And you start thinking pointillism. Pointillism is based on the color theory that all colors are made out of every other color, that you have all the colors, that's not show, in each color. It's just the amount of the colors that creates what they appear to be. But that's the whole concept of pointillism. That's a concept of the original TVs too, they had the little 3-colored dots, and as the image passed across the dots on the television screen, if it's somebody like is just the neutral background, the red, green, and blue would all be about the same. But as somebody walked across with a red shirt, the red would glow and the others would get smaller. And that's how they created that image, that illusion of color. Stippling, push and pull. Remember that the amount of pressure you add as you're putting down a pastel will make a difference. Now, I just went across black there, and you notice it picked up some black on my pastel. That's showing. Is that showing? Okay,
Yes.
thanks. I don't want to go back into a lighter area with that black on there. Always, I have a rag in my other hand, and I wipe it before I go back in. And I also wipe it before I put it back into my palette. That way I don't have to be cleaning my pastels all the time. They're clean every time I put them down. Saves a lot of time. You can see some nice layering happening here. You can press down hard and get a nice heavy color, or you can almost glaze it. Glaze it is just using a feather touch, just caressing across the top. And that's going to be hard to see, but there's a very thin amount of pastels cutting across that dark, that red over the dark. You can see that slightly, yes?
Yes.
Good. Okay, thank you. So the amount of pressure, if you're finding your paper is picking up too much pastel too fast, you may be, ask yourself, am I using too much pressure and putting too much pastel on the paper too early? Because again, the paper is like little sand pieces there. And if you fill those little pieces of sand up with pastel, eventually you're not going to have a sand on the surface to grab more pastel. So start with thinner, lighter layers and work up. You can also ask, is it very soft pastel? If you're using soft pastels all the way through, like Terry Ludwig's or something, you're going to build up, there's a Terry Ludwig, you're going to build up pastels so fast, it's going to fill the tooth. So a rule of thumb is fat on lean. So lean fat on top of lean. So you want to start thin and lean to start with, and then build up fatter and fatter until you have nice, rich pastel on the very surface. Save those rich, soft, heavy strokes for the very end. So you have to think, we have to think, we have to plan. We want to work intuitively and for the creative spirit to flow through us, but we also need to use our minds as well. Swish and lift. Swish. You can get feathery strokes with the tip, or also with the side of the pastel to get variety. Blending, as I said before, you can blend with your fingers. You can blend with a paper stump, a torchon. Because the torchon also picks up some pastel, see it picking up the charcoal here? You can use that aspect as well. You can use it to blend, or you can use it to pick up and drag the pastel somewhere. You can rub in with your hand. Oh, I didn't show you one of my most important tools. You can use a rag to either slightly lift or to blend. I often use my kneaded eraser. As I'm thinking, this becomes very therapeutic. But you can also make a regular shape, and you can, I'm looking for a spot this might work. You can kind of roll it across the pastel, and it can pick up some of the texture. I'll do it here. I think it might show. See how it's irregularly picking up the pastel?
Yeah.
That's a nice way of getting texture. Was that tool I wanted to show you earlier? Here, vital tool to have right there.
What is it?
It's a fingernail brush.
Oh,
When you are done, you're gonna need this. Oh, it's like you go into a bank or a store or something, say, oh no, really, I'm an artist. I'm not dirty, I'm an artist. Thinking about mixing color, you can layer like this so it's visually mixed, or you can actually blend colors together this way. But again, remembering that this is probably going to be an underlayer because it's flattening down your pastel and it's not going to have a lot of luminosity. Then you can come back over after with a fresh stroke. The fresh stroke leaves little texture marks, so some of that undercolor is showing through the more solid color. A wonderful exercise to do as well is mixing your colors. What am I doing? Think. So, the opposite. I always have a color wheel over here, and this is not your traditional triadic. It's a little different. So yellow, bluish, purple. This is more and I'm going to talk about this another week, the spectrum color wheel. So you want to get something the opposite color in approximately the same value tone. So I'm mixing the yellow with this purple. And if I mix them properly together, is that the yellow I was using? It's this one. And if they are the complements to each other, you should come up with a very nice neutral. You can do it by, you can either do a nice gray this way, or you can go and get a flat gray. But which is more interesting? The one that actually has two colors layered over each other is going to be visually more exciting than just a straight ahead gray. Kind of done some cross hatching, showing through pointillism juxtaposition. All right. If blending that in, this is my spray bottle. This has got a rougher spray. I don't know if you can see it down here. No, you can't. See how it's kind of speckly? That's what I was speaking of earlier. And if you spray that, I always test it off to the side first.
Oh.
And as that dries, you can see, I think you can see, and you can't.
Sure, we can
I was
see.
so excited earlier. My phone, when I was zooming in, it was working so excitingly.
We can see,
But-
Terry Lynn. We can see.
Okay, it's pushing the alcohol before it dries. It kind of pushes the pigment out and creates these wonderful little dotted areas that, as I said, you can use as textures for rocks or something. I'm going to exaggerate with, I wouldn't normally use black, but then you can move around those very natural little shapes on one side as if they're shadows on one side and maybe some highlights on the other side. And they create a very natural looking subtle stone or rocks, any sort of texture. And it will react differently on different types of surfaces, different papers. I made a video of the painting I did for the, and I keep referring to this just because it has so many texture techniques in it, but the one that was in the international show. And I did a video of how I created that and all the different approaches I worked with close up. Now, if you use alcohol, it is going to set your pastel onto your surface. It's going to act at this point almost like a fixative, and it's going to hold it there once that dries. Of course, you can wet it again. Oh, there's a thought. Look at that texture. Right? Experiment, have fun. I don't know where my brush went. Oh, there it is. You can wash it in with a textured brush. Sometimes if you want, you can spray this off to the sides, get it wet, and maybe lift some of the pastel to create more texture. Each paper and each pastel has its own personality, and you want to experiment with them and try different ones to find the one that you're the most comfortable with or that works the best for what you want to do. I have 2 or 3 that I like depending on what I'm going to paint. Like if I'm going to do a wild, very loose landscape, almost very impressionistic, I'm not going to use the same paper or surface as I would for a fine portrait. So thinking about those aspects of painting. That's one thing I wanted to say was DakotaPastels.com does have packages. If you want to try some of the pastels or the papers, they have packages that you can buy, and they'll send you a number of samples of paper or different types of pastel sticks. So you can experiment and try a variety. These are some of my experiments. This, that Japanese paper I told you about, you can almost see where I taped it down on the edge. This one was tricky to get the tape off, I tell you that, because of this nice natural deckled edge here. But I did it, I was careful, so I taped it down so I could put some pumice gel on the surface, and then I painted on it. There's quite a bit of texture even without the pumice gel. This painting, I believe was on UArt, and I was working along and I did some of the alcohol spray. And in some areas, it did some funny textures like this. So I went ahead and played with it. Like, oh, that's kind of cool. Come back.
I love that.
See how it's pushed here a little bit? So it looks like natural texture. And you don't have to worry about making irregular little dots. They're made naturally for you. Those are sold. This one is made with that coarse pumice gel that I told you about, that I had to wash these areas in with alcohol because it was so coarse. And then I came back over, and you can see I skimmed across the very surface of the texture there. I just kind of, just across the top. So as the pastels were sticking up, my stick went across the top and just caught the very top. So anything that had gone down into the crevices was down below. See how it's a little darker on some of those surface areas. You see my cursor? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. And this is still pastel. I just had some powder, and I got my brush very wet, and I almost painted it in. I did paint it in. That's what I did. But often people don't think about doing that with pastel. It's still pastel. That's all I used. This was a very personally dynamic painting for me. I put this, the paper is BFK Reeves paper, which is often used for printing, like intaglio printing and things like that. I had it since college. So I'm like, I should use this. So I taped it down. I put a little bit of pumice gel on the top so it had texture. And you can see a lot of the variety. I washed a lot of it in. See how it looks like almost like a watercolor wash in the back, because I washed it in. This is vine charcoal here that's washed. Here's fresh surface vine charcoal. I also did some dribbling. I have a nice little, is my other camera on? Oh, I'm on this right now. But I have a small needle-nosed bottle here that I can use and dribble alcohol down over it. This guy, when I did this painting, had gone through drug rehab, and he was working so hard to come back. And I just had this, I wanted this feeling of energy, but torn. And then I thought, well, he needs a little color in his lip. And I put this little bit of red, and I'm like, oh no, that's too much red. So I just started to wipe it off. And it created this almost like blood or something. And I liked it. So I left it. He's very androgynous look to him. And I worked with that. I don't know how many sketches just trying to catch the personality and his, get the figure right. Okay, I want to move in. You can see some dribbles of alcohol here and here. This I dribbled down, but then I also just took the side of my vine charcoal, as I showed you before, and just ran it straight down for those straight lines. They're not there. I don't see that, but I wanted that feeling. So to get feeling, sometimes you need to do other things with your pastels besides the typical marks. This is on, remember the Richardson board? This is just the natural board. I put a thin amount of pumice gel on that so I could do this painting over it. So I incorporated the color of the board as an element in the painting. Here is when it doesn't work sometimes, in my opinion. This paper had just way too much texture for trying to work a portrait on it. It's kind of interesting, but not the effect I normally want. This was just on some Mi-Tinte paper. Early on, it got wrinkled. You can see it dried with wrinkles. So that's why you want to tape it down so it doesn't wrinkle as it's drying. And play around with PanPastels, different layers. You can see the cross hatching to get a feeling of color. Sometimes just making random strokes creates an interest in your painting. Here's that. This is the one I did the video on. This was all washed. This is originally on a board, a Richardson board, 16 by 20, I think, washed in, used some acrylic inks, put texture on. I just sprinkled some of my my pastel crumbs on it, you know, leftover crumbs for texture and stuff, worked in with my PanPastels and the brush. I just kept moving things. To me, I'm finding that you can work pastels almost like sculpting. You can add and you can subtract. You put things in, you can pull things out, you can overlay things, and you don't, if you notice the wires, if you want a line, don't make just a solid, even line. Vary it. It makes it much more interesting. See, even this one swinging across, I added a little light as if it were catching the red that's coming across there, a little blue up in this. That's just one wire. But if you look at it in reality outside, you'll see it goes from one color to another, because as it changes its angle, it will catch light differently and reflect things differently. So don't make it flat, make it fun, make it interesting. This is with my gel, pumice gel, and a bristle brush. So the underpainting was just that, and then I got to work paint over it. That, if you plan ahead, especially, can create some wonderful textures in your painting that are unexpected. And you see a lot of pastel artists doing this now. I have some links. There's a couple of YouTube videos, not mine, that I recommend if you want to learn more about different pastel sticks or pastel variety. There are a couple I have links to about different pastel surfaces. Do be aware that some of your surfaces will take liquids and some will not. My own created surfaces do, the board, UArt does, Lux Archival takes it very well, but you don't want to put you don't even want to sneeze on Sennelier paper.
And have done it.
So, unless you want an extra texture.
Nope, wasn't a good thing.
No, and I love that paper, but because I was doing a demo one day, I've told some of you this, I'm sorry, and it was, you know, a virtual demo for a group in New Jersey, and I'm painting along, oh, hey, let's add some texture. So I picked up my alcohol spray bottle and I sprayed it on, and I didn't realize I was on, it was Sennelier or one of those anyway. And the thing just started turning to gum. It just started melting in front of me. Like, oh, look at that. We all learned something today. Don't use liquid on this paper. So that's a super fast introduction. I hope there's some things that can help some of you that are newer, especially. Please do email me. It's just travelingartista.com. I do that because a friend of mine, when I did my website, said nobody can spell or say your name, so you might as well, you know. It's just too complex. So I also have a YouTube video. So if you go to my website, the YouTube videos there, my Patreon is growing. I started it right before Christmas. I've got a number of people in it. We meet once a month. Besides, I put special videos and demos up there. And if you email me, I can also critique paintings. I use Patreon. No, okay. Everything starts with P. Patreon, Padlet. What's the Procreate to help make some light corrections. Procreate's a great program. I'll talk about that during our technology week, for you to experiment with changes on a painting without actually touching your painting. Because sometimes, you know, go, oh, I think it needs this, and you put it on the painting and then you have too much pastel there or something. But do consider checking out my Patreon if you'd like. It's not very pricey at this point. I tell my lower levels are like, you know, 2 to 4 cups of coffee a month. So and I appreciate it. No, really. So
We've got a question from Kay. She wants to know which pumice gel you like, the finer or the coarse.
Oh, the fine pumice gel. It's the fine pumice gel comes off normally if you put it smoothly, like a 400 or 500 UArt texture. It's very nice. You can also get marble dust and mix that with gesso or any other acrylic gel. But I like the pumice gel because it's pre-mixed and I just throw it out there really quickly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other
Anytime again.
questions?
Do you use Golden or some other brand?
I do. Yeah, I use Golden right now because it's the one I tried and I like it.
Okay.
I am starting to use more using a palette knife to put it on. You have to be careful. It can leave a sharp edge, but sometimes that little sharp edge is nice in a painting and sometimes it's not. I found the sponge brush didn't work all that well.
Okay, thanks.
I've tried rollers too. The rollers, if you put it on a roller, like a painting roller, it instead of getting the sharp sand, it seems to make little round, microscopic rounded mounds. So it's not catching the pastel as nicely as I wanted it to. Yeah, so palette knife or bristle brush is what I usually use.
Okay, thanks. Do you thin it? Because somebody I heard said they thin it a little bit with water before they put it on.
Yes, that's right. I've done that to my whole jar. I did. It was so long ago that I don't even think about that now, but I do thin it down somewhat.
Okay.
Because what you're looking for is the sand. You want that pumice on your surface.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes. Good comment. So next time, I don't have my notes. The next one is something.
Oh gosh. With the Zoom, it's early March. I mean, it's
Yeah,
early
it's
February.
early March.
No, it's February
We'll-
8th. It's February 8th.
Right. We're doing one a month.
It's February 8th.
The next one, this was very introductory because, and I hope if
And the
some
next
new
one
people are
is the
here, that
art-
really helped.
Art Basics on February 8th.
Art basics, yes, which includes composition and those types of things. Because I know a lot of people have studied, but a lot of people miss that stuff along the way. So
It's also
I had
great.
one of my Patreon people today sent me a painting and it was really nice, except they had a river coming straight at me right in the middle of the paper. And compositionally, it's not going to work as well as if you use a rule of thirds and some of these other aspects. So
Here are some close-up of marks and other items that you could possibly see better than before. This is using the side to make a nice strong mark. This is a swish where you start with a heavy touch and then lighten it. This is using the very edge of a hard pastel like new pastel, and that way you can get some very clear lines. Here's the old man squiggly lines. For variety, you press hard, you lift higher, softer touches, and maybe rolling the side of a pastel can give you amazing textures. At this point, I am working in some cross-hatching. This allows the underlayers to show through and creates a more vibrant color to the eye. It's like adding spice to food. Here I'm taking some near complements and blending them. You don't always need a color. You might be missing a color, but there's a great chance that you could possibly mix it by overlaying two colors. Don't forget that one. That can work very well. Here's just some stippling with the tip, little dots. You can blend and smudge. Here's blending before with smudging and dragging. Spraying with alcohol can give you some very interesting effects, although they're not as obvious. Here you see a close-up of some of those textures with the underpainting and the alcohol, how it pushes the pastel away from the center and leaves a line around it. Very natural. That was a paper stump. Here I'm using a paper stump to blend or drag color, depending on how you use it. So the best thing is to play around with these aspects, to keep trying some out. This is vine charcoal and how it blends well with the pastel. Smudges great with a torchon, which is a paper stub. This is the showing the vine charcoal and then smudging, not even smudging, just blotting over with a kneaded eraser for more texture. Sometimes it works better in one area than another. Again, just keep playing, keep having fun with it. You're going to learn so much by experimenting. Remember, you can always take alcohol, wash this paper all over, and start anew. That is, if you have a good solid paper like UArt or Lux Archival or some sort of board. That way you can reuse your surface. If you're using some of the other pastel papers, you have to be very careful not to get liquid on it, like Sennelier. That was just a glaze of pastel over the surface, a very soft whisper of a touch to get an effect. Very, very subtle. Here is where I have washed the pastel out and created a nice, even background. Again, hard press, lift as you move away. Press hard, then lift as you move away, and you can get a nice varied or a graded stroke. You can glaze over with another color. You can do strong marks, lines, stippling, which is little dots. The very edge, the corner of a hard pastel like Nu Pastel gives you strong lines. Lay it right down on the side. Don't go with the tip. Again, look at that. That is a nice glazing of, and some of the painting underneath shows through. I've sprayed here with some alcohol, waiting to see, because in each area it's going to react differently with the pastel that's underneath it. Sometimes you can blot it, sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. Here's a little stronger, and there with a torchon or paper stump, it actually lifts some of that paper and creates subtle, subtle marks. A glazing, blending with the fingers. You want to do this on under layers and not on top, because it will press the flakes of the pastel down. And as you finish, you want the flakes to be at angles to catch the light and refract it to create brighter, more vibrant colors, even if you're using grays. Here's some close-ups. You can see how the pastel, if you use a light whispering touch, just glazes over the top. It kind of skips on the top of the sand. If you need to reach me, it's at Traveling Artista for my website, my Gmail, and my Patreon page for more ongoing support. Meanwhile, stay dusty, my friends.